Well, as mentioned, it's going to be quite a difficult winter, South Africa. And this is the warning coming from acting Eskom CEO Calib Cassim. He was giving an update just a short while ago on the state of the grid as the cold sets in. Our reporter, eNCA's Heidi Giokos, joins us now live from the Megawatt Park. And Heidi, good morning to you. Hopefully it's a warm good morning because it is, winter currently looming right now. But I mean, I've seen you on social media updating, the country. I've heard you during that media briefing and relentlessly, asking those questions, trying to really get to the bottom of, is there a plan to ensure that there are lights and that South Africans are warm this winter? Did you get the answer?
Yes, Dumelo, I think I must just emphasize the fact that we have been pre-warned. This is not the first time we have been told that this is going to be a dark and cold winter. We do know that the grid is constrained and there are, of course, many issues at play. But let's get further clarity. We are joined by the acting CEO of Eskom, Calib Cassim. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. All South Africans want to know is what the winter is going to look like. You've already emphasized the fact that it's going to be a really difficult one, especially because the demand is much higher than the supply. Maybe just explain to us what the winter ahead is going to be like for South Africans.
Thank you, Heidi. As we presented here today, we believe that with our interventions, if we can keep the unplanned outages to around 16,000 megawatts, then we foresee during peak stage 6 load shedding. What does that mean in terms of consumers? That's 10 hours of interruption in terms of a 32-hour cycle. In the event that the unplanned outages and the poor performance of generation escalates to 18,000, there is a possibility of those stages going as high as stage 8. That means as individuals, you would be subjected to 16 hours of interruptions in a 32-hour cycle.
Very worrying, especially also because of the economic impact and the impact on people's lives. You're saying in case of it going to stage 8, but we do know how unreliable our units are and how unreliable many of our power stations are. They are old, they haven't been maintained. Are we going to move to stage 8? I know you're saying in the eventuality, but we've seen how unreliable these units are.
Yeah, I think every effort is made not to get there, and over and above the performance of the generation fleet, we also have diesel that is available to us during these peaks, as well as we all also appreciate elements of demand-side management and load curtailment. So it is going to be tough. We're aiming not to get there, but in the event that we go there, the most important thing for South Africans to understand, we would do it to protect the grid and to avoid a blackout.
Okay, so you've emphasized the fact that we're not near anywhere a blackout. But I want to ask you a question around the fact that you knew there was issues with Kusile, you knew there were issues with Koeberg. We understand that because of what's happening with Koeberg and Kusile, we are 3,000 megawatts less than what we were last year. And so don't you think that as Eskom you should have planned a little better instead of telling South Africans, well, you're going to have a dark and cold winter because of Kusile and Koeberg?
So I think firstly, right, to fix these does take time. The stacks will only be completed for Kusile, the temporary stacks, by November, December. And with regard to the Koeberg outages, that was already according to the outage schedules. There's another element that deals with the supply and demand, and that's more megawatts on the grid. Firstly, as Eskom, let's acknowledge that having the grid capacity to connect megawatts is key. We touched on that during today's presentation, but we need more megawatts through the DMRE process. The more megawatts that can be connected will help with the supply and demand. So we acknowledge our shortcomings. We need to learn from them and make sure it's not occurs in the future. Again, better planning and better execution.
Certainly. Let's move away from demand and supply and speak about the issues of sabotage. We do know that the SANDF contract has been further extended to various power stations, and you wonder what is actually going on at these power stations that the army needs to be deployed. How volatile and dangerous is the situation at the power stations to have the army deployed there? Is the situation under control?
So I think it doesn't apply to all stations. We definitely see the more focused areas and certain key stations. But more importantly, it's also the leadership at those power stations. As the head of generation has indicated, he's made some changes at some of these concerning stations like Tutuka, putting a much more seasoned manager in charge of that, and the support of the SNDF plus our own security and law enforcement. What we've seen as positive, Heidi, is the support from the security cluster in terms of NECOM. We've seen a number of arrests made in the recent past, and yes, so and more importantly, working in conjunction with our unions to work together to ensure we can deal with the malfeasance at the stations.
Just lastly, Mr. Cassim, I want to ask you around the issue of asking South Africans to reduce electricity supply as much as possible. There was an issue raised about inverters not charging straight after we come out of a load shedding schedule, and South Africans hearing this are getting increasingly frustrated with the call to reduce electricity supply and to decide when Eskom must tell us when we should charge our inverters. But tell us how important it is to move the time of charging inverters, because that could possibly be contributing to an increased stage of load shedding.
Yeah, I think what we need to understand with regard to that, and we've seen as more and more residents put inverters into their homes, when the load shedding does start, especially after when you're at stage 6 and it's a 4-hour interruption, we have seen from a system operator this peak, and we need to manage it in the best interest of managing the system, but also trying to manage the impact that we don't escalate to higher than stage 8. I think from our perspective as Eskom and the technical system operator, we need to better understand that and then communicate effectively with the public on how we can work together to manage this.
So you cannot assure the public that we will not move beyond stage 8. At this stage, it's touch and go.
Yeah, like as I said at the Inlet Africa, I don't lose sleep in terms of the national blackout, but I do worry every day around stage 8, and because of the vulnerability of the system, the unpredictability of the generation performance, it does go up and down, and in a particular day, it can vary anything between 2,000 to 4,000 megawatts, which could then take you over that threshold of stage 6. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do appreciate your time. That is the acting CEO of Eskom, Calib Cassim. And as you heard, Tumelo, that because the grid remains vulnerable, there is no concern of a national blackout or collapse of the grid, as there have been some concerns and reports. But we could possibly be seeing stage 8 implemented during the winter period because of this supply and demand issue. Very concerning, especially because Eskom is fully aware of what was happening with Kusile and Kuburg. But as you heard the CEO mention, the fact that they have acknowledged their shortcomings and they just have to work with what they have at the moment. So, I've been repeating this, South Africans are just going to have to prepare themselves for a very cold and dark winter, given where we are in terms of availability of megawatts.